We are, folks. We are live. I am posting a link in the chat.
Cool.
And anybody who wants to join us, please feel free. There goes.
Yeah, please join us if you're out there. We'd love to
I'm just
hang out
gonna,
on a Thursday night.
yeah.
Cool.
All right. All right. All right. So now let's get our little essay out here.
Yes, indeed.
I see Grim already put a link or an informational thing here by Grimm, but this is actually not the Fantastic Imagination essay, Grimm. This is just the imagination. The subtitle is Its Function and Its Culture. And it was published in 1867. So it was the first one.
That's 20 years earlier than this one.
Yeah.
And well, give or take.
And the Fantastic Imagination is quite a bit shorter, but it deals in different aspects of it. It's mostly directed to educators, so teachers and of small children and stuff like that. I'm going to just issue a warning that my internet sucks tonight for some reason. So we may have connection issues, but we'll muddle through.
Yeah.
All right. So,
I'm happy to start with that paragraph, and then we'll just move through it. It gets really juicy in here, and we'll see what happens.
Do you want to just read maybe the last couple sentences or the last? Yeah, I think the last paragraph is only 2 sentences, but maybe the last sentence of the paragraph we left off with last time, and then lead into it. The new one?
You're talking about the one that starts with shall, then the human intellect.
That's the one we're going to read now, isn't it?
Okay,
or is it?
So
is it?
Let me back up.
No, you're right. You're right. Sorry, it's the question. But how can the imagination have anything? Okay, so we can just start with that. I was in the wrong spot.
Okay, I will start with that paragraph then. Shall then the human intellect, we ask, come into readier contact with the divine imagination than that human imagination? The work of the higher, capital H, must be discovered by the search of the lower in degree, which is yet similar in kind. Let us not be supposed to exclude the intellect from a share in every highest office. Man is not divided when the manifestations of his life are distinguished. The intellect is all in every part. The intellect is all in every part. There were no imagination without the intellect. However much it may appear that intellect can exist without imagination. What we mean to insist upon is that finding out the works of God, the intellect must labor, workmanlike, under the direction of the architect, imagination. Herein too we proceed with the hope to show that how much more than is commonly supposed the imagination has to do with the human endeavor, how large a share it has in the work that is done under the sun. But how can the imagination have anything to do with science? That region, at least, is governed by fixed laws. It's interesting that he's using quotations as much as he is in here with like.
Yeah, I think what he's doing is he has a secondary character asking questions in this essay, right?
Yeah.
He does that in the Fantastic Imagination essay too, quite a bit.
Okay.
And then so someone asks the question and then he answers them. It's his imagination.
No, it literally does remind me of like Well, it just reminds me of the symposium. Like it does, there is a Socratic sort of like
Mm.
give and take going on here too. Because
See,
he's
I wouldn't have known that because I've never read it. So
no,
that's
I'm just saying like with those types of questions, he's like leading you into this place of, I mean, if you're paying attention, like he's pulling you into this too, you know. Um, I guess I I'd keep going, but I think there's it's really interesting to me that he talks about how um, there's no imagination without the intellect. However, it must appear that the intellect can exist without imagination. And not that I want to get held up on that necessarily, but um, it gets to a question that I have is where exactly is the imagination located? Is it within the intellect? Is it within human cognition? Or is it outside of human cognition? And is that question even capable of being answered? Because I'll leave it at that. I don't think because I question whether or not it really is capable of being answered.
yeah. Okay. So, like, I was recently talking to some people and mentioned that, and so this is how I would classify rationality. What what our rationality wants to do is it wants, first of all, it wants to know, or not firstly, let's just say it wants to know, generally speaking, it wants to know how many, where, right? What is it and how, like all those questions,
Yeah.
right? And what's interesting when talking about things like this, and George MacDonald doesn't call imagination, um, like he says here. Let me see if I can find it. Um, we proceed in the hope to show how much more than is commonly supposed the human imagination has to do with. Oh no, that's not what I was thinking. Anyways, it's divine, right? Imagination for him is divine because, like, at the beginning of the essay, he talks about um, our creative faculty not being all that creative, really, because everything, like our language, is comprised of the forms, right? Like that's what we clothe our thoughts with, and those forms come from the imagination of God, and therefore we live and move and have our being within the imagination of God, which
Mm-hmm.
I would say at least is creation, if not more, right? And so if we're talking about God,
Yeah.
if we're talking about something being, if we are living and moving and having our being in God, right, which
Mm-hmm.
is, I think, conducive with the scriptures,
Yeah.
then we are essentially living and moving and having our being outside of time and space,
Yeah.
right? So how are we going to conceive of a location, something,
Yeah.
right?
I get exactly what you're saying.
Um,
I guess and exactly what Jed's just saying right there is because I do conflate probably in a way that I maybe shouldn't, what the imagination is and what the intuition is
Hi,
and
Jason.
function. um, but and it probably is false to also like without defining exactly what the intellect is and what the full scope of human cognition is or something like that. Like that distinction I didn't like that I had said that previously. And I'm not trying to pick hairs necessarily, but I think in regards to the imagination and its association with the intuition. I think that divine intuition is certainly something that I hold, but how that interplays and exchanges with the human intellect is super fascinating. I mean, we could keep reading because it's going to continue to unravel in these next couple of
I think so too. Yeah.
yeah.
And I mean, I'm like, okay, I forgot to preface this whole thing with I'm not a scholar, but I'll say it again. I'm not a scholar, okay? I haven't read Plato or Socrates or you know, and and I don't necessarily understand the idea of the human being as a soul and a spirit and like in a body. I don't think about those personally. I don't think about those things as being located somewhere,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And I think the intellect is interchangeable with all of those things, actually. One of the things that I think about when I think about the intellect is that God said, "Come, let us reason together," right? And so, and He gave us an intellect. So, and I don't think reason and rationality are the same. I think what I wanted to say earlier about rationality is that rationality is, oh man, I'm stuck now. I'm already stuck. It's
Well,
like it's like the world of the senses, right? It's
sure.
the what, the where, the how, and
Mhm.
it's where we want to make sense with our senses
Yeah.
of the thing,
The
right?
world of the intelligible.
And
So,
yeah,
yeah, which
so rationality asks the questions like, how many are there? That's why people get tripped up on the Trinity, for example, because
sure.
they think it's about quantity and it's not, right?
Or
Or
location.
or location.
Yeah.
It's, and you're talking about something that exists outside of time and space, right? So,
Yeah.
um, and yeah, I guess some people might think that that's a cop out, but I don't. I mean, I think it's just the way it is, like if we're honest. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know if I
We'll
did a
keep
very good
going.
job
I
of
feel like that first paragraph, I wasn't even going to read it, and then we got hung up on that one sentence there.
well, if you look for the word intellect in this essay, you'll find it many, many times.
Well, and that's why I feel like it's almost an intent in my own mind. I almost need like a definition or something for
Yeah. Well,
the intellect.
maybe we'll find it. Maybe we'll
Yeah.
find it as we go along.
Yeah. All right.
Because George MacDonald's definitions are slightly altered, I
Yeah,
think.
I wouldn't expect him to have like I'm gonna
I
have to
think
map onto him. He's not gonna just map right onto me.
right, and he's in the business of redeeming these things, like these definitions, right? Like he's making them.
Yeah,
He redeems them anyway.
he's breathing
Like
life
like
into.
yeah, like when he talked about facts in the beginning of the essay, and he said that they were seeds for the imagination, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Because we want to do the duality thing. We want to separate and throw, one away, keep the other, but he's like, "No, we need them. We need them. We need the facts, right?" So I don't see that he's going to throw away the intellect either, or rationality for that matter.
no, I don't see that either.
Yeah.
And that's what we're about to talk about.
Yeah.
So, but how can the imagination have anything to do with science? That region, at least, is governed by fixed laws. True, we answer. But how do we know of these laws? How much of science already belongs to the region of the ascertained? In other words, has been conquered by the intellect? We will, we will not now dispute the vindication of the ascertained from the intrusion of the imagination, but we do claim for it all the undiscovered, all the unexplored. Ah, well, There it can do little harm. There it can run riot, if you will. No, we reply. License is not what we claim when we assert the duty of the imagination to be that of following and finding out the work that God maketh. Her part is to understand God ere she attempts to utter man.
Mm.
Where is the room for being fanciful or riotous here? It is only the ill-bred, that is, the uncultivated imagination that will amuse itself where it ought to worship and work.
We should talk about that. Because this is where George makes it very clear that he's not talking about,
Fancy.
unfettered imagination, right? Or
Yeah.
yeah. Have you got any thoughts?
Well, I mean, yeah, there's a lot there. I'm stuck on the last part. Obviously, that's going to pull my attention, but it reminds me of I forget which book that is, but it's like amusing yourself to death. I think there's a title. Anyways, yeah, it's just like how much time can actually be wasted. Like I understand that it says worship there, where it's like there's a way in which there's a reverence within the imagination, but there's also an actual work that's involved in it, where otherwise,
Well, he said further up before in last week's thing, he said, what we mean to insist upon is that in finding out the works of God, the intellect must labor workmanlike under the direction of the architect imagination.
yeah,
Hereinto we proceed in the hope to show how much more than is commonly supposed the imagination has to do with human endeavor, how large a share it has in the work that is done under the sun. So, like if we go back to your example of your window boxes, for example, okay, so you look at that deck and those stairs and you say, and you imagine something else, right? But now what? Does it just appear before your eyes? No, now you have to labor, right? And workmanlike, and the imagination is the architect of what happens next with all that wood, right?
mm-hmm.
And I think you can apply that to, because from there he moves into science and
Yeah,
but what I think is interesting is because a lot of people have difficulty with Christianity and imagination holding hands, right? They're like, oh, that we need to be careful.
yeah,
They just don't trust themselves, right? And so he says, license is not what we claim when we assert the duty of the imagination to be that of following and finding out the work that God makes. Her part is to understand God before she attempts to utter man.
Did you notice that he switched to the feminine pronouns there, like
I did.
immediately?
Yeah.
Like that, like immediately, Sophia.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because it's pulling. Sorry, I'm not.
Well, I mean,
I'm not trying to be cryptic.
no. I think it's because Sophia is the wisdom of God, right? And that has to be connected to the imagination. The wisdom of God has to be, if we live and move and have our being in God's imagination, then we live in the wisdom of God,
Mm-hmm.
I think, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I mean, so let me just read, let me find it here. I think it's Proverbs 8.
Okay, I've got a question for you, but
I'm listening. Go for it.
Do you feel like part of the amusement that we sometimes allow our imagination to fully revel in a riotous way is due to maybe a false sense of boredom that we have? Like, we lack the imagination to dig into that which truly would nourish us and sustain us, and we give our imagination over rather to something like fancy that, because boredom can there's a way in which I've wasted a lot of time with my boredom, where I've talked about it before, like I could go play Zelda on the GameCube for the next 2 weeks, or I could go outside and build the greenhouse, and so it's like, and ultimately I know which one's going to be more satisfying in the end. And I'm not trying to knock Zelda, because it's a great game and I love the Wind Waker, but like, it's I I guess I'm just trying to say is that's what I imagine myself like, sort of wasting um this more reverent, like there's these greater possibilities that are available, but I'm allowing myself to be pacified with something far less. There it is.
Oh,
I am
hello.
so sorry. You know what? My internet is so lagging that you just popped in now. And then I was like, wait, somebody put something in the private chat? Who was that? And then, and then I saw you down there and I'm like, oh no. And like, I don't know how many comments came flying in all at once. And okay, my internet's really screwed up here. So
Well,
sorry about that.
I did roll a save versus Sherry not noticing you in the studio. I apparently failed it.
Oh my
Oh, look,
goodness.
Jason is here too.
Hey,
Awesome,
Elementary.
Jason.
Hey,
Welcome.
Grizz.
Hey,
Hey.
this is great.
Hi, Grizz. I've not been on we've not shared screens before.
That is true. You're doing a fabulous job. I like it. I like that Sherry has somebody to talk to that's not anybody else around here. So you're doing a service to us all. It's a pleasure to meet you, Luke.
It's
Yeah,
great pleasure.
I'm super enjoying this actually with Luke and Jason, and now Grim. It's great. Okay, so I'm trying to remember what your thing was.
I wanted to hop in on. I found this VictorianWeb.org place where I can read along with you guys.
Yes.
Oh, you know what? I could. Actually, I
want me
don't
to
even know how to do that.
Copy.
And there's this part I wanted to go back over one of the first parts of the paragraph that Luke just read.
Yeah.
He's like, "True," we answer. But how much do we know of these laws? How
Yeah.
much of science already belongs to the region of the ascertained? In other words, has been conquered by the intellect. We will not now dispute your vindication of the ascertained from the intrusion of the imagination, but we do claim for it all the undiscovered and unexplored.
Mm-hmm.
That I want this region of the ascertained and conquered by the intellect. I wanted to know if we could spin out talking about that for a minute or two.
Well, I mean, I think like when he says, "But how much do we know of these laws?" Right? Like so like I think what he's pointing at there, poking at, is the idea that people think that everything has already been discovered. You know?
Studies have shown.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I don't know. I haven't lived that long, and I already know that almost every time they make a discovery, it's redundant in 10 years, right? So, yeah, and then he says so we're not gonna dispute your vindication of the ascertained.
Yeah,
Okay,
what's
we're not
vindication there?
we're not gonna say we're not gonna dispute the fact that you think everything has been discovered. Okay, we're gonna just leave that alone, but we're gonna claim all the undiscovered and all the unexplored. We're taking that, right, for imagination. And if you want to think that it's all been discovered, that's fine. You just go ahead and do that. We're not even going to talk about it because for him, it's not worth it, right? Like for him, you'll see that often in his writings, this disdain for the know-it-all, right? He's not interested in talking to people that think they know it all most of the time. So I think that's what that's getting at, Grim. That might not be everything, because with George, there's always more, but that's what I can ascertain at the moment.
I like the way he tied conquering and conquered by the intellect is the region of the ascertained.
Right.
Crystallized into the known.
Yeah.
We know this now.
Yeah.
We have ascertained, and these are our axiomatic suppositions now.
Right.
It's not presuppositions anymore. There are suppositions.
Right, and we have them, right? Like it's a having thing, over and above a being thing, you know?
Yeah. It's conclusive knowledge. And it's the paragraph at the end of the long essay that wraps everything up into this nice tidy package, and no other words can really be said about it because we've conquered it now. Like, I'm not going back to that dang essay and rewriting it. It's like I don't have time or energy for that. So
yeah, and I'm even going to falsify some information on this paper so that I can get my funding. Because I need to have, right? Yeah.
We've ascertained that if we're going to survive.
That's about it. Jed says, Jed, you should jump in, but I know you're working. Rational thinking deals with what is. Imagination deals with what's possible. We had a lot of conversation today about a talk that Douglas Harding gave, where he talks about the world the as-if world and the as-is world. Grim, you would love it. I'll actually link it for you. I can't do it here because I don't know how, but I can send it to you. And
we have other ways of communicating. Send it through those.
Yeah, and that's almost what, like, I don't know, Jed, if you followed that discussion, but that reminds what you just said here. Rational thinking deals with what is. Reminded me of that. What is, as is. Okay, shall we continue on?
Yeah.
Can I read some?
Sure.
Please do.
Are we at but the facts?
Yep.
Okay. But the facts of nature are to be discovered only by observation and experiment. True. But how does the man of science come to think of his experiments? Does observation reach to the non-present, the possible, the yet unconceived? Even if it showed you the experiments which ought to be made, will observation reveal to you the experiments which might be made? And who can tell of which kind is the one that carries in its bosom the secret of the law you seek? We yield you your facts, the laws we claim for the prophetic imagination. He hath set the world in man's heart, not in his understanding, and the heart must open the door to the understanding. It is the far-seeing imagination which beholds what might be a form of things and says to the intellect, try whether may not be the form of these things. Try whether that may not be the form of these things. That's a hard one. Which beholds or invents a harmonious relationship of parts and operations, and sends the intellect to find out whether that be not. I'm lost at try. Somebody else take over.
Okay,
Sorry.
well, I'll read that. Try whether that may not be the form of these things, which beholds or invents a harmonious relation of parts and operations, and then sends the intellect to find out whether that be not the harmonious relation of them. That is the law of the phenomenon it contemplates. So, nay, the poetic relations themselves in the phenomenon may. Now this might get a little tricky. So, the poetic relations themselves within the phenomenon may suggest to the imagination the law that rules its scientific life.
Mm.
Yea, more than this, we dare to claim for the true, childlike, humble imagination such an inward oneness with the laws of the universe that it possesses in itself an insight into the very nature of things.
Bullseye.
Isn't it?
Mhm.
Like, you don't, like, if your imagination is operating in the way that he thinks it should be, not riotous and not outside of the domain of the divine, but seek, how does he put that, following and finding out the work that God makes, right? That's the duty of the imagination for George MacDonald. If that's what your imagination is up to, then it can know. It has such an inward oneness with the laws of the universe that it can possess in itself an insight into the very nature of things. And it's true. That's all I can say.
I like that he brought in the word prophetic here, because this does get into the question of like, is your will involved in the process of imagination? Not that I want to like dive way back into that, but it is this projection to a certain degree, but it's also a revelation at the exact same time.
It's prophetic and a revelation at the same time?
Well, it's a projection and a revelation. So where those things meet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean,
yes.
it does, especially in the next paragraph, because he says, Lord Bacon tells us that a prudent question is half the knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whence comes this prudent question? We repeat and we answer from the imagination.
Yeah.
So I think that's even the question becomes prophetic, right? Like, because you have to intuit or have an insight into the very nature of something in order to formulate the question.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you're already halfway there.
When I say a projection, maybe an act of faith would be a better way of articulating it.
It's like looking to see, so it's like really hard to articulate, but I think it's like the projection you're talking about is I'm projecting the light of my consciousness.
Yeah.
So it's like the projection the way a flashlight is a projection.
That's right.
And
yeah.
your imagination is already in service performing suggestions of what you think you might see there. So it can map to what you're actually seeing faster, like you're serviced by your imagination when you're looking in the dark.
Yeah.
That.
Yeah, well, that's actually what he says. I don't know if you've watched the other episodes, Grim, but he says that the imagination is the light that lights the lamp within the forms. And the forms are that of nature. So anything that God has created, right? The universe, whatever the scientist may be inquiring into, right? So the imagination is, according, like if George MacDonald knew that there was such a thing as a flashlight, he would have said, the flashlight, right? But he says lights the lamp that, is within the forms. So yeah, it
Yeah,
is
but that
shining in.
that framing kicks me into Plato's cave with the form, like the light hitting the forms, making the shadows on the wall.
Yeah, but for George MacDonald, the light lights the lamp within the
In
forms,
within the forms.
within the forms themselves. So, um,
I wanted to swing into the poetic part of the last
mhm.
paragraph.
Yeah, sure.
This, nay, the poetic relations themselves in the phenomenon may suggest to the imagination
Mhm.
the law that rules its scientific life.
Hmm.
So first, I want to highlight poetic relations.
Mm-hmm.
Like that just bowls me over, and I accept it as okay. Yes, I know what you mean, but like intellect wise, rationalized, reasoned into pieces, I don't. I know what he means, poetic relations. It's like yes, obviously, but my intellect has no grok of it whatsoever. It just slides right through. And then in the phenomenon may suggest to the imagination, which means that like it's here's a smoke signal that you might interpret and send to the intellect as the right answer.
It's about right.
Suggest to the imagination the law, and like it's like some discussion with Chad involved like smoke and laser beams, like in the cat burglar movie where they're breaking in the museum, and like the smoke lets you see the laser beams you have to
Right,
do the
right, right.
boogaloo through.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
It's like may suggest to the imagination the law
Mhm.
that rules its scientific life. Feels
There
like
you go. That's
exactly
that's
that.
a really that's actually a really good image. So, um, Luke's our resident poet. What is poetic relations? What does that mean to you, Luke? Poetic relations.
It reminds me of what Jason said in our last conversation. He- Poetic relations is the emergence of our language. Like the imagination precedes um, poetry. So in our attempt to communicate at all, um, we have to move into language. But the only way that we can do that is by um, turning is to create. So I mean, whether that be like uttering a simple sound, like mimicking. I'm thinking of onomatopoeias. I'm thinking of like the very genesis of like just the imitation of what we see in nature through what we can phonetically recreate. Um, but that's just in. I'm talking about language. This sort of is across all um, finite forms, but like the way that we can. What did we talk about last time? We talked about flying pigs or
Oh, we were talking about
prayers
the
that are doves.
yeah, yeah, that it was that the imagine how did he put it? I'm thinking I'm trying to think of his words that the imagination was half of language was a result of the imagination, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Jason's got a whole
thous
message for us.
yeah, thousands of words which were originally poetic words owing their existence to the imagination. Yeah. Poetry is the source of all the language that belongs to the inner world. Yeah. Can you, were you going to say something, Jason?
No, it looked that I had a passage, but it's not necessarily. I mean, it probably is related to some degree because it's George MacDonald, but it was. It's not really talking about poetry, but I can read it later if it comes back up. I think it came to my mind when I was listening to you guys when I was trying to drive back home. and you had mentioned something, so it's kind of a ways back. But
Well, do you want to share it?
I can. Yeah, I mean, it was about when you were talking about. I think it was when you were talking about the senses and the intellect and things like that, and it made me think of in Fantastes when when he encounters that house, and it's got like the woman, and she's married to a husband that is overly sensible. I don't know if you guys remember that part. If I can read this, but it says, so she's talking to him. He gets there, and this is right after I think he has that encounter with it's either the alder, the ash tree, or something. So she says to him, "It is just as I feared," she said, "but you are now for the night beyond the reach of any of those dreadful creatures. It is no wonder they could delude a child like you. But I must beg you, when my husband comes in, not to say a word about any of these things, for he thinks me even half crazy for believing anything of the sort. But I must believe my senses, as he cannot believe beyond his, which give him no imitations of this kind. I think he could spend the whole of Midsummer Eve in the wood and come back with the report that he saw nothing worse than himself. Indeed, good man, he would hardly find anything better than himself if he had 7 more senses given to him. But then he says, "But tell me how it is that she could be so beautiful without any heart at all, without any place even for a heart to live in. I cannot quite tell, but I am sure that he would not look so beautiful if she did not take means to make herself look more beautiful than she is." Um, I wasn't. That was some of the part. I just like the part where she says, like, "I, I must believe his senses as he cannot believe beyond his." Um, and then, what does it say? To disenchant it out of the realm of the ideal into the realm of the actual. So I don't know, just made me think of that part in the book where you have this lady who was talking to him about fairyland, and this little girl who's like believes in fairyland, and she's reading the book, but the father comes in and just like disenchants everything because he's just can't believe beyond his senses. Um, so I don't know.
Yeah.
That's what that feels unrelated at this point, but I mean, I guess it's kind of related.
Well, sort of, but not. I'm thinking about that Merlin Sheldrake conversation about the world of the senses and how that actually can enchant the world too. But I don't know. I don't know if we should drag that into this conversation. I don't think that's what George is talking about. I actually don't think that's what George is talking about in that thing that you just read. He's talking about more of a doubting Thomas kind of person, you know. Yeah, the guy that lives only in the region of the ascertained, as Grimm says here. Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's already been conquered by the intellect. Yeah.
Sorry, I feel like I'm hopping in here and like.
No.
I'm trying to figure out where you guys are. So.
Me too. I'm trying to figure out where we are because we were talking about a lot of different things. Actually, we just were talking about poetic relations. I'm thinking about that that quote by William Blake. Let's see if I can find it here about the one I'm talking about. Luke, where he talks about seeing the world in a grain of sand. William Blake. Let me just look it up.
Looks like
because I think that's a good example of poetic relations.
Let's see. It says, to see the world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wild flower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's William
Do you want me to
Blake.
read the whole thing? Or?
Sure.
Okay,
Let's
so
hear
it says, all right, to see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wild flower, to hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. A robin red breast in a cage puts all heaven in a rage. A dove house filled with doves and pigeons shudders hell, there all its regions. A dog starved at his master's gate predicts the ruin of the state. A horse misused upon the road calls to heaven for human blood. Each outcry of the hunted hare a fiber from the brain does tear. A skylark wounded in the wing, a cherubim does cease to sing. The gamecock clipped and armed for fight does the rising sun affright. Every wolf's and lion's howl raises from hell and human soul. The wild deer wandering here and there keeps the human soul from care. The lamb misused breeds public strife and yet forgives the butcher's knife. I don't know how long this is.
It's
Want me to keep
really
going?
long.
Oh
Maybe
my
we should,
goodness.
maybe not. It's
It
super
is
long.
very long. Wow.
But just that last thing you read there was so interesting. Where did
This
it
is
go?
all it's really interesting, yeah.
It's a lot of Widerspruch. What is that word in English? Contradictions.
Was that Swiss German you just said?
Yeah.
Boot.
Sometimes I can only think of the words in German. And okay, so he says here, this is really off track, but I just want to, where'd it go? The lamb misused breeds public strife and yet forgives the butcher's knife. You know, like when people abuse animals, everyone freaks out, but then it's fine to slit their throats.
Mhm.
Yeah, I love it when poets point those things out. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the reason I thought of that for poetic relations was because why? Because it's these contradictory things, right? The world in a grain of sand, heaven in a flower, eternity in your hand, eternity in an hour, you know, and only poetry can make sense of those
Mhm.
or contradictions, right?
Mhm.
Everyone goes, "Oh yeah," when they read that. But if you were to propositionally lay that out, they'd be like, "Are you crazy?" Right? So that's what I was thinking of in that regard. And then we were talking about wisdom at one point. Remember, Luke?
In this conversation?
I thought so. Because he moves to the feminine. This was a while back.
Yeah.
When he moves to the feminine, and I pulled up Proverbs 8 here.
Okay.
And
That's good.
And why did I want to read that? Because where is that piece there where he talks about the feminine, or he makes it feminine?
Where the imagination is feminine. I saw that.
Yeah, here it is.
It's
He says, "Her part is to understand God ere she attempts to utter man." Right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
I wanted to ask about that one.
Yeah. Okay.
There's so much there, but
That part.
So I'm just going to read Proverbs 8. Does not wisdom cry and understanding put forth her voice? She stands in the top of high places, by the way in the places of the paths. She cries at the gates, at the entry of the city, at the coming in, at the doors. Unto you, O men, I call, and my voice is to the sons of man. So there she's calling to, like he says her part is to, what is it? Can you read that, Luke? Because I don't want to switch my tabs. Her part is to something before she utters man.
Her part is to understand God ere she attempts to utter man.
Utter man. Okay. Hear, for I will speak of excellent things, and the opening of my lips shall be right things. For my mouth shall speak truth, and wickedness is an abomination to my lips. All the words of my mouth are in righteousness. There is nothing froward or perverse in them. They are all plain to him that understands, and right to them that find knowledge. Receive my instruction, and not silver, and knowledge rather than choice gold. For wisdom is better than rubies, and all the things that may be desired are not to be compared to it. I, wisdom, dwell with prudence, and find out knowledge of witty inventions. The fear of the Lord is to hate evil, pride and arrogancy, and the evil way, and the froward mouth do I hate. Counsel is mine, and sound wisdom. I am understanding. I have strength. By me kings reign, and princes decree justice. By me princes rule, and nobles, even all the judges of the earth. I love them that love me, and those that seek me early shall find me. Riches and honor are with me, yea, durable riches and righteousness. My fruit is better than gold, yea, than fine gold, and my revenue than choice silver. I lead in the way of righteousness in the midst of the paths of judgment, that I may cause those that love me to inherit substance, and I will fill their treasures. The Lord possessed me in the beginning of his way, before his works of old. And this part is heavily discussed, okay? The Lord possessed me in the beginning of his way, before his works of old. I was set up from everlasting, from the beginning, or ever the earth was. When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no fountains abounding with water. Before the mountains were settled, before the hills was I brought forth. While as yet he had not made the earth, nor the fields, nor the highest part of the dust of the world. When he prepared the heavens, I was there. When he set a compass upon the face of the depth, when he established the clouds above, when he strengthened the fountains of the deep, when he gave to the earth to the sea his decree, that the water should not pass his commandment, when he appointed the foundations of the earth, then I was by him, as one brought up with him, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing always before him, rejoicing in the habitable part of his earth, and my delights were with the sons of men. Now therefore hearken unto me, O ye children, for blessed are they that keep my ways. Hear instruction and be wise, and refuse it not. Blessed is the man that hears me, watching daily at my gates, waiting at the posts of my doors. For whoso finds me finds life, and shall obtain favor of the Lord. But he that sins against me wrongs his own soul. All they that hate me love death. So this whole thing is about wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And wisdom is always spoken of it in the feminine.
Mm-hmm.
Sophia, of course, is wisdom. And so when George MacDonald switches into the feminine, I have to imagine that imagination and wisdom are the same thing to him,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's pretty heavy.
Well,
Because wisdom was there. Wisdom was there before when he was. How does it go here? When he prepared the heavens, I was there. When he established the clouds, when he strengthened the fountains of the deep. Yeah.
yeah.
It works. It works.
I just think about the evolution of consciousness and what that means as we're drawn into that process through the pursuit of wisdom. So but that wisdom is just constantly calling for you. It's drawing you into that into the fullness of consciousness. I don't know.
Imagination, wisdom.
Yeah.
Imagination / wisdom.
Yeah, that's
Sophia.
Sorry,
/
that was your point. It's the same.
Jesus /
Yeah, but yeah.
Well, I think that's a good point, because I think that helps to emphasize that wisdom isn't isn't directly associated with knowledge. Like they're not disassociated, but a lot of people will think having wisdom is having knowledge. And like in George MacDonald says in Lilith, when he's talking about one of the children, he says she's full of wisdom and empty of knowledge. And it's like you can be full of wisdom, and especially if you're relating it to something like the imagination, you can be absolutely full of wisdom and empty of knowledge.
You know what? When like if I'm sitting around with a bunch of old ranchers, what always strikes me about them is they have a lot of knowledge when it comes to cows and dogs and bears and horses, right? And they can talk about that stuff all the time, like always. But when it comes to living with all those things, that's where the wisdom enters the conversation, right? And the wisdom is always something I find anyway. The thing that strikes you as wise is the thing that you would have never thought of, right? It's like a I don't even know how to describe it. It's a surprising element to the conversation. It's like, oh, it catches your attention. You're not, oftentimes when we have conversations with people, we know what they're going to say next, especially nowadays, when people are talking about, when they're taking a side, and you just know what's coming next, right? You've heard it so many times, and you tune out. And when somebody says something that you're not anticipating, it strikes me often as some kind of wisdom. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Why would that be? Would it be because it provokes a question in you think? Maybe.
I think because maybe it comes from their personal experience, and I think that's the only that's the only place you're going to get it. Like wisdom you can't go get a degree in wisdom. And this is why John Vervaeke is really trying to cultivate all these practices and all this stuff, because in order to gain any kind of wisdom, you have to have lived.
Yeah, he embodies wisdom, I think, because he embodies humility too, and he's able to listen. And I think that's a good portion of it as well. At least it seems to me.
That's true too. Yeah, totally.
Well, he's good at that for sure.
Okay, should we do another?
That's probably my favorite line in the Bible is that it's in Ecclesiastes. It says, "All this I proved by wisdom. I said I'll be wise, but it was far from me." So I think that it's called an MA in wisdom. So
it's a master's.
Wisdom science.
Well, that's what's weird about wisdom, is the idea that it could ever be ascertained.
Like, it can't.
And you do have this as sort of like your default mode of operating, like seek and you will find, knock and the door will be opened. But that doesn't mean that it's like, well, then you've arrived. That's just your further up and further in, so
yeah.
I think people do have that that false assumption that wisdom will be a conclusion, when wisdom is probably the furthest thing from a conclusion.
Well, that goes back to that original paragraph where he talks about that noble unrest, right? And that we don't want to rest on our laurels, and we're not looking for some kind of repose, right? There's, yeah.
Yeah, because I think, that's what always interests me is, what Solomon asked for wisdom. Like, it's the one thing he wants from God, and God says, well, you'll have it. You can have it. You'll be the most wise person in the whole world. There won't be anyone wise like you. And Solomon in Ecclesiastes writes, all this I proved by wisdom. Like, God gives him wisdom, and wisdom proves to him that he doesn't have wisdom. And it's like, what the heck? Like, it's like that's your wisdom, is to realize just how much, the more you get wisdom, the more you realize, man, I know so little. Like it's just
Well, I think that is what the wisdom, like that,
Yeah.
that is the cloud of unknowing. That is, who said that? Socrates or Plato? Um, I don't know who, because I
I don't
never
know.
read either
You're
one
the
of them.
scholar here. Yeah.
Well, here's what I think maybe like is knowing God's will as if that was something that could be known. Like I think
Oh,
a lot of times people will conflate those two things. Like I know God's will. So I have
I do when I see a pretty girl. That's how it works, right? The Lord told me we should be married. I'm using my imagination to prophesy.
I got a letter from a
prophetic.
guy like 3 days before my wedding that God told him that him and I were supposed to get married. And I'm like, well, he didn't tell me. I was like, oh my God. So not imaginative.
Yeah.
Why don't you just tell me how you feel? Why do you have to tell me how God feels? Ah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Wow. Do you guys want me to keep on reading the essay?
I'm gonna
Do whatever.
I'm gonna read here because he gets back to the feminine again. So,
There's a part
Lord
that
Bacon.
I want to get to. Sorry, that I think will probably resonate for Luke. I mean, you've probably already seen it, but it was something you were talking about earlier. I think
Oh
we could
yeah,
at least
okay.
maybe
Oh, look,
end there.
Charlie's
It's
Charlie's
not this
here.
paragraph. The end of the next paragraph, but I don't know. Anyway, we can read on.
Well, if
Oh,
you
hey.
wanna tackle it now,
Oh,
if
okay.
it's
I mean, do you want me
yeah,
to just read up to that point?
Sure.
Okay.
yeah.
Lord Bacon tells us that a prudent question is the half of knowledge. Whence comes this prudent question? We repeat, and we answer, from the imagination. It is the imagination that suggests in what direction to make the new inquiry, which, should it cast no immediate light on the answer sought, can yet hardly fail to be a step towards final discovery. Every experiment has its origin in hypothesis. Without scaffolding of hypothesis, the house of science could never arise. In the construction of any hypothesis, whatever is the work of the imagination. In the construction of any I guess I read that right. Sounds weird to me. The man who cannot invent will never discover. The imagination often gets a glimpse of the law itself long before it is or can be ascertained to be a law. The region belonging to the pure intellect is straitened. The imagination labors to extend its territories, to give it room. She sweeps across the borders, searching out new lands into which she may guide her plotting brother. The imagination is the light which redeems from the darkness for the eyes of the understanding. Novalis says, the imagination is the stuff of the intellect affords, that is, the material upon which the intellect works. And Bacon, in his Advancement of Learning, fully recognized this its office, corresponding to the foresight of God in this, that it beholds afar off. And he says, imagination is much akin to miracle-working faith. No, it was that last line. I think that you mentioned something before. I think about faith and the imagination, Luke.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I could spout off, but I wanted to give Sherry a chance to respond to it.
No, go for it.
We have someone who joined us.
Yes, do you know Charlie?
I have
Charlie
not met
Brooks?
Charlie.
Hey.
Hi, Charlie.
Hey. How are we?
Charlie?
Good. How are you, Charlie?
Good. Fantastic. I'm around some ambient noise, so I'll mute myself whenever I'm not talking.
Have you got any thoughts?
I'm going, well, yes. Strange, like, I've actually started for the first time reading The Master and His Emissary.
Okay.
And one of the interesting things he actually puts forward is like there are 4 ways to grasp the world. Don't think I can remember all of them, but I think it was the rational, the intuitive, the imaginal, and there was one other, and I think it was more of a sort of a solid one. But it was, I love that. It was like an interesting thing of just like trying to imagine how engaging with the world in pure imagination. I like the last quote is like, he who cannot invent cannot discover anything. And I find you enter into a weird paradox when you write or when you do anything creative. There's always the intuition that you're discovering it.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you're writing a poem,
Yep.
if you finish the poem, you can look at it again and go, oh, that's not the right word. It's like, not the right word to what?
Right.
To your goals, to like, and it's an interesting point of discovery. I really like that the diagram that the movie Inception used about how we receive the world and then we sort of imagine that construct of the world and then we take that input again, and sort of like creativity is like taking that middle bit. It's taking that liminal space where we're taking in our inputs and we're just considering them within our own discoveries. And essentially, like, yeah, it's taking what we see and playing with it as a map. I don't know if that seems to be the common ground for what imagination is. I think that's an interesting way to view it, especially considering going back to the essay, all words, I can't jump out of the Zoom, but all words come from describing the inner experience, like the poetic experience is about.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's, yeah. And I think it is a really interesting thing. It's like the power in poetry is in the newness of it, the way in which you can see it in a new way. Like all words are poetic, but it's about the framing, it's about the positioning and where you can see them in as they truly are, kind of thing.
As they truly are. So that's interesting because this is like George MacDonald talks a lot about things as they are, right? It's God seeing things for what they are. And so he's implying some kind of actual reality that may be hidden, right, from us. And
I think it has to be.
Right. So that quote that you're talking about, Charlie, is all words then belonging to the inner world of the mind are of the imagination, are originally poetic words. And then further down, he says, thus thousands of words which were originally poetic words, owing their existence to the imagination, lose their vitality and harden into mummies of prose.
What, to you guys, what does poetic mean in that sense? Does it, yeah.
Poesis, in my understanding, is the act of creation, but I also understand the act of creation being bound in sort of a desire to have communion with something outside of yourself, to actually love something.
Nice.
So,
yeah, the connection.
I truly feel like there's that isolation that one feels, and this need to create for the sake of not necessarily communing with other people, for instance, but at least with the creation itself. But if it were to actually be a way, if that creation were then to be a way that, like, then other people could begin to have communication with each other through these creations, because that's
But
what I'm.
that would ultimately be love too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then your whole existence becomes poetic, actually. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to say that, because like I think a lot of the interesting thing about poetry is that it tries to connect things. It tries to connect things in ways that only the creator is really trying to see them. Like there's not always meant to be a logical connection. Sometimes there's a symbolic connection. Sometimes there's a rhythmic connection. Sometimes there's a color, or a shape, or a silhouette, or anything like that. And it's the ways, and like, so poetry, yeah, like there was this. I remember Clive James, an Australian poet, said like, a poetry is something that is complete. A poem is something that is complete, and I like that because like you can take an excerpt, you can take a stanza of it, but the idea is that a poem is bringing everything into itself. It's not trying to refer to everything else. It's trying to get everything connected into itself. And that's always the interesting thing, is like all words are from the inner experience. So like the inner experience is, speaks like vulnerability or shock or like,
Well, this reminds me of that part in here where he talks about the snowdrop, right? Like, the snowdrop is the flower that blooms out of the snow, and science can tear it apart, but it will never see that the snowdrop actually represents how does he put it? Suffering, hope, and pale, submissive confidence, or something like that.
Yeah.
And so he sees the flower as a person, right? In this life, and in also right relationship with God. Like he sees them as they are, as they really are, right? Like the snowdrops actually telling the story of what it means to be human. That's what he sees. And he says, science can tear it apart and never see that, right? So that, and I don't know, my mind's a little goofy at the moment. I've had a really bad week and a lot of brain fog, but something that Charlie was talking about there earlier triggered that what I just said. So I don't know what it was, but
I mean, yeah, definitely. I hesitate to give Luke too much credit, but like there's something to that. Luke Thompson, the iconic vision.
Oh yeah.
Like it's something like that. It's like everything is connected as persons. So each thing is a fractal resonance of everything, but in and of itself, it is that unique thing. So you can see everything almost connected within it. I think it's a really interesting thing.
Oh, it is.
I think that's really true. But like, I do think I think there's an obvious reason as to why we cannot see things as they are, in that it would literally just be too much. Like if everything that I engaged with, I saw as a person, I wouldn't be able to take a single step. I'd just be talking and talking and talking and wondering and wondering and wondering, and it would just be overwhelming. But I think it's that thing of like, the poetry is what you see first. It's that thing in Tolkien. It's just like, he sees no stars who does not see them first, of living silver made to sudden burst to flame like a flower beneath an ancient song. It's just like, it's like the snowdrop. It's the same thing. And
I love it.
But it's that thing of just like, it's first. Like the poetry is the thing you see first. Like everything else like deadens it and inhibits it and sort of squashes it, makes it easier to calculate and rationalize and square away, which is necessary, but it's just like it is the first thing.
Which is why you have to because you have all these potential forces that are operating against like, because I do agree with you that it's first, but sometimes it feels like it's last because of all that noise, and then you need to go set up a hammock in your backyard and just lay there and enjoy, the beauty that's in the warmth in the wind, and take a nap or read a book or whatever it is. It's like you have to ground yourself again in order to, because it is, but I think it's like sometimes it's just a flash. And
that's
so
the discovery part.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's that bit where it's just like, I don't know, like poems come different ways and everything like that, but the majority of the really important ones come when it's trying to wrestle with something that I don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what we talked about it. We talked about that at the beginning of the essay. He talks about this chasm that exists between us and God, but not between God and us, right? And that chasm is filled with, an infinite number of revelations, and it is that it's the chasm that of unknowing, right? And these little glimpses that keeps us moving forward. And, of course, I'm thinking now about the book of Job, because, as Job is wrestling with all this suffering in his life and demanding an answer from God, he gets these little glimpses, during the book. And they're so interesting, because he'll be like, wait, I've seen a little shoot growing off a dead, like a stump of a tree. Maybe there's life after death, And his friends go, oh no, we rip the tree out by the roots and we throw it in the fire. They're just like destroy all of his hope, and then he, another thing he notices is he's like, well, wait a minute though. I thought you said that the wicked suffer, but they're not suffering. They're really having a great time, like they're prospering. They're happy. They're having children. They've got money. They got fat cows, And and it's those glimpses that keep him on track, actually, with his own integrity, right? Because as soon as he feels himself slightly slipping, he reaches for that thing that he saw that he can't deny, right? And that's what carries him through that entire tirade with his friends, are these little glimpses, right? Yeah. And it's so interesting. Like, I've had many of those little things in my life where I've had these little glimpses of stuff, and when I think back on it, I think my whole life has been lived because of those glimpses. Like I have strong convictions about things because of a glimpse. Like, seriously, a glimpse.
Yeah.
Of something. That's just crazy to me when I think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Read on, Sherry. I just want to add that quote Martin Shaw has been saying recently. It was just like, good art was part of the departing package when we left Eden.
I love
good
it.
Art.
Good art was part of the gift. Was a part of the gifting basket when we were like, all right, time to get out of here.
Good art only comes out of suffering, anyways. So
yeah,
right,
definitely.
All right, so we left off in the scientific region of her duty of which we speak. The imagination cannot have her perfect work. This belongs to another and higher sphere than that of intellectual truth, that namely of full-globed humanity, operating in which she gives birth to poetry, truth in beauty.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite the sentence, actually. Let me try reading that better this time. In the scientific region of her duty of which we speak, the imagination cannot have her perfect work. This belongs to another and higher sphere than that of intellectual truth, namely, of full-globed humanity, operating in which she gives birth to poetry, truth in beauty. Okay. So that's what gives birth to poetry, is truth in beauty. Man, he said that in one sentence. It's just unbelievable. Did you guys get it? That sentence?
Yeah. There was.
No?
I want to remember his name. But it was as a skateboarder, like a really young, up and coming, like new skateboarder. He's like a little bit of a hippie, long hairs and all of that type of stuff. But I remember he said, like, because he discovers and invents tricks and things like that, and there's one thing to discover it, and then another thing to do it, and then the last thing to do is to make it beautiful.
Oh.
And that's the final thing, is like, that's what we're trying to do in life. It's like we're trying to discover it, understand it, and then make it beautiful, then make it fit, make it flourish and stuff like that. So yeah, that's what it is to me, because it's that you get to see, I don't know, like, I think beauty has this idea of like connecting with everything else. Like truth has that potential to disconnect, to separate, to be the fact kind of thing. But in the same way that facts are the seeds of the imagination, they're the things that, like, when it's growing, it bleeds out and it comes into connection with everything else.
Right.
I don't know, like, beauty is that thing that is called out, is seen, is recognized. So it's that thing that's put into concert with something else. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
A heavy sentence, though.
Okay, we'll try for the second sentence. But her function in the complete sphere of our nature will, at the same time, influence her more limited operation in the sections that belong to science. Coleridge says that no one but a poet will make any further great discoveries in mathematics. And Bacon says that wonder, that faculty of the mind especially attendant on the childlike imagination, is the seed of knowledge. The influence of the poetic upon the scientific imagination is, for instance, especially present in the construction of an invisible broken whole from the hints afforded by a visible part, where the needs of the part, its uselessness, its broken relations are the only guides to a multiplex harmony, completeness, and end, which is the whole. From a little bone worn with the ages of death, older than the man can think, his scientific imagination, dashed with the poetic, calls up the form, size, habits, periods belonging to an animal never beheld by human eyes, even to the mingling contrasts of scales and wings, of feathers and hair. Through the combined lenses of science and imagination, we look back into the ancient times so dreadful in their incompleteness that it may well have been the task of seraphic faith as well as of cherubic imagination to behold in the wallowing monstrosities of the terror-teeming earth the prospective, quiet, age-long labor of God, preparing the world with all its humble, graceful service for his unborn man. The imagination of the poet, on the other hand, dashed with the imagination of the man of science, revealed to Goethe the prophecy of the flower in the leaf. No other than an artistic imagination, however, fulfilled of science, could have attained to the discovery of the fact that the leaf is the imperfect flower. That's pretty beautiful.
I recall the first time I think I spoke to you one-on-one, Sherry, and you kept saying, the leaf is the flower, the leaf is the flower. And I was like, what on earth is she talking about? I was like, I'm trying to understand.
Well, that is a reference that He thought that was so. He thought it was so weird.
No, I
that
was
is
like, I can tell she's saying something true, but I don't know how to get my mind there. I was like, I'm like, I'm agreeing with her, but I can't quite get there mentally. It's making more sense now.
yeah. So what this is Goethe wrote a poem. What's it called? Metamorphoses of Plants. And he spent quite a bit of time staring at a plant. I'll just read the Wikipedia really quick. Metamorphoses of Plants was published by German poet and philosopher Johann Wolfgang von Goethe in 1790. In this work, Goethe essentially discovered the serial homologous nature of leaf organs in plants. Although Sir Richard Owen, the British vertebrate anatomist, is generally credited with first articulating a definition of the word homology in 1843, it is clear that Goethe had arrived at a sophisticated view of homology and transformation more than 50 years earlier. And so the poem that he wrote is his scientific discovery. And it's not written as a scientific discovery, it's written as a poem. I don't think I'll read the whole thing because it's kind of long. I'll read a couple of stanzas from the beginning. Thou art confused, my beloved, at seeing the thousandfold union shown in this flowery troop over the garden dispersed. Any a name dost thou here assigned, one after another, falls on thy listening ear with a barbarian sound. None resembleth another, yet all their forms have a likeness. Therefore, a mystical law is by the chorus proclaimed. Yes, a sacred enigma, O dearest friend, could I only happily teach thee the word, which may the mystery solve. Closely observe how the plant, by little and little progressing, step by step guided on, changeth to blossom and fruit, and then on. So if you want to read it, it's called The Metamorphoses of Plants by Goethe.
Mm-hmm.
And it's him just studying a plant and then making this scientific discovery that was later credited to this botanist. But everybody knows that Goethe made the discovery 50 years before he did, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just as a poet. I mean, he was a scientist too, I think.
It reminds me of I mean, you'll be familiar with it in Job, where it says, it's like basically saying ask nature and it'll speak to you and tell you. And so he's just observing this flower and it reveals, that's the thing, when everything's poetic, it actually speaks to you. It actually has a voice.
That's right.
And it's actually talking. Yeah. And it's living. Yeah. I can't find where it is. I don't know.
In Job? I think it's 12. 12.
Oh. Yep, you're right. But now ask the beasts, and they will teach you, and the birds of the air, and they will tell you, or speak to the earth, and it will teach you, and the fish of the sea will explain to you. Who among all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this, in whose hand is the life of every living thing, and the breath of all mankind? So.
Read that. Read that. Who among you? Read that again. Or.
Who among all these does not know that the Lord has done this?
Right. Who among all, that sentence there? It's easy to glide over it, but who among all these, and that all these are the sea and the earth and the beasts, right? Who among all of these doesn't know? Doesn't know. Okay. Just want to say that out loud.
That's good.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that leaf is the flower thing is good.
Yeah. Well, maybe this is a good place to stop. I know Luke's got an early night.
I know. I was kind of fading out there at the end.
And I'm a little.
Yeah.
For some reason.
question. Maybe, or I can save it for next time.
No, go ahead.
He says seraphic faith and cherubic imagination. This is probably can of worms. I like. What does this guy know that I don't know? My God, to just throw those words around like this, like the fiery serpent faith or something like that. Fiery angelic faith, I guess. And the cherubim are the ones that are like the almost like the 4 different creatures, right? Well, man's one of them, but they're a bunch of.
Don't
like
they
a
have?
hot-
Aren't they represented with like wings and eyes?
And four faces, I think. Oh,
those are the
you're talking about
those are the ophonym.
often have the circles and the weird thing.
Yeah.
Like a bug.
The seraphim, I think, are the ones that are just wings and like one eye, whatever.
Yeah.
And the ophonym are the ones with like the wheels and wheels of eyes or whatever. But yeah, the cherub is the many face. I think that's an interesting one, like the cherubic faith and the seraphic imagination, or did I get them mixed up?
I'm just looking for it here. I can't find it.
It was seraphic
here.
faith and cherubic imagination.
Yeah, okay. Because
I was just wondering. Yeah, go ahead. Say more.
oh man, I think I was talking about faith with Luke a long time ago, but like faith is the belief of a connection between your inner reality and your external reality. And like to have a stronger faith is to have a stronger confirmation of that connection and relationship. But everybody acts more or less within. Everybody always has faith. You cannot exist without faith. Like it is, if you act, you're assuming that your understanding of the external world is real, and so everybody has something. And then, but the imagination is this sub-creation to where the world is new and you and not you. I don't know. That's an interesting distinction made between the two. I think that'd be worthwhile exploring later.
Seraphic faith and cherubic imagination.
Yeah. Like in
that's really cool.
The seraphim around the throne, and that's when there's like this.
If you guys are gonna head off, I'm gonna jump out now.
All right. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, Charlie. That was great.
Thank
you.
Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, good to meet
Easy
you.
as. Nice meeting you guys.
It's nice meeting you too. Yeah, maybe we'll go into it more next time. It's just a really, like, how George MacDonald does that. He'll just throw in these words, and I'm like, man.
That's good for pointing that out, actually. And if I wasn't so out of, energy, I would be able to think about it. But at the moment, I can't.
Yeah. Well, I think from what I gather, the aphonym, like Charlie was saying, are the ones that are like wheels, and they're wheels of eyes. And then the seraphim, I thought were like kind of like fiery serpent-like and like angels or something like that.
Look here.
And then the cherubim have the different faces, for like 4 different faces, and they have like calves' feet and all this stuff, and I don't know. So, but we can. That could just be some meditation for next week.
Yeah.
Yeah. I liked what Charlie was saying though, because what he was just saying a few minutes ago, and I didn't even catch how he was tying it into the seraphic and the cherubic, and I don't think I fully grasped that either, and we'll think about it. But it reminded me of the hermeneutics of suspicion versus the hermeneutics of beauty stuff from, a while back. It was a conversation with Sam Adams and John Vervaeke. And John Vervaeke was trying to describe what beauty was. I have the quote, so I'm just going to read it.
Yeah, do it. Yeah.
He says, and this is my favorite John Vervaeke quote. I don't care about any of the other stuff. No, I'm just kidding. But he goes, Beauty is when we have good phenomenological reason to believe that appearances are disclosing reality, that
Okay.
are to make sense phenomenologically, not just conceptually, are in contact with reality.
Yeah.
And
Wow. That's really great. Can you read it one more time?
yeah. Beauty is when we have good phenomenological reason to believe that appearances are disclosing reality, that our attempt to make sense phenomenologically, not just conceptually, are in contact with reality.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
But at the same time, I wonder too if, like, does the imaginal have to alternate between understanding reality, like questioning the beauty, or just, assuming? Never mind. I'm probably too tired to ask this question, so I'm just gonna stop. I don't even think I can.
My brain is just like total brain fog. But
Yeah.
there is this here. It says, in the scientific region of her duty of which we speak, the imagination cannot have her perfect work.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Belongs to another and higher sphere of than that of intellectual truth, namely a full globed humanity operating in which she gives birth to poetry. I'm trying to figure out where the clauses are in this sentence so that I can splice it. Because sometimes that helps me to understand better. Is he saying, because George MacDonald just can't help himself. He has to include everything when he talks about something.
Mm-hmm.
And so he often does this, he starts out with a very propositional sentence, and then he says, like, in the scientific region of her duty of which we speak. And then he starts describing this higher sphere than that of intellectual truth, namely a full globed humanity giving birth to poetry. And then he ends the sentence with his original proposition. I don't sometimes know where that fits in, if I'm honest.
I don't know either. I definitely
Right?
would like to break this paragraph. I would love to break down more and more, because even when he says but poet, only a poet will make any further great discoveries in mathematics, I'm just like I would love to break that apart. Because Craig, our friend Craig, I mean, I'm sure you've seen Craig around Sherry.
Yeah.
He was telling me, it was probably like a year ago, he was looking into mathematics and like kind of trying to work out a new form of math or something like that. And I mentioned to him, was curious about the meaning of numbers, the quality of numbers rather than like quantity. And I think that would probably get into something more like the poetic form of numbers and how that would I mean, it almost seems like that happens in stories and in biblical stories and in other stories in general.
Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm.
And it even alludes numerology, because numerology tries to pinpoint it down, and it'll still somehow, get outside of it, because you have like meaning within numbers and things like that. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
There's just so much in there. I'm with you guys though. I'm gonna chat, but I chugged a Mountain Dew on the way home so I could try to keep up.
We're all a little bit shot.
Yeah.
It was a bit of a slow roll today, but that's okay. It was fun to have other people in the chat with us.
Yeah.
And
I really enjoyed that.
and okay, well, let's start then next time with, maybe we'll have to go over, excuse me. See, there it is. Maybe we'll have to go over these last three again, because we never even got close to them, I don't think.
Really,
yeah.
You can start with Lord Bacon, the Lord Bacon chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Lord Bacon.
We will remember that.
When pigs fly. When pigs fly.
When pigs fly.
I had bacon tonight.
Yeah.
Nice. All right. Well, thanks for doing this. Sorry I was late.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for
We're
joining
going
us.
out Pizzas the Hut.
We're going to keep doing this, so come join us next time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm going to
that
end
was
the
fun.
broadcast here real quick. Hang on. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you.